Our next contestant is Brian Litzinger, whose thesis, well, he'll tell us what his thesis is. His name is myself, Carl McQueen, and home including.
Thank you. First, I want to start off by thanking my committee, which Carl McQueen, or Professor Carl McQueen, Professor Kaliji, and also my chair, Professor Kelly. Additionally, I want to thank my family for the support, especially my wife for putting up with all the late nights and all kinds of stuff like that. So, to start off, this thesis is about adaptation. So, it focuses mainly on a large number of industrial cities that have been left with remnant buildings as their industry has failed or gone away. And so, many of these buildings, though, hold a historical and cultural value for that city, but are left underutilized, vacant, or destroyed. So this thesis is proposing that we can revitalize these buildings through new programs such as educational, business, and some maker spaces. As a case study, we'll be using a steel mill machine shop in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. For an overview, just to let you guys know what we're going to talk about, we're going to start with the site, some analysis, building analysis, move on to the design solutions, and then follow up with where this could go on site, as well as other places. So Johnstown, Pennsylvania was left with over 200 industrial acres at the end of the steel mill era. These 200 acres were spread across 4 separate sites. Specifically, we'll be looking at the Lower Cambria area, which is the oldest site and home to the Cambria Iron Works. Additionally, this site is a registered location. So the site to the south on the site is the Johnstown Welding and Fabrication buildings that basically they make parts and kit or custom fabricated steel products. And then at the center of the site are 4 main buildings from the late 19th and early 20th century. 3 of the peripheral buildings are being occupied right now by the Center for Metal Arts, which is basically a learning center for blacksmithing. So then at the center of those is the machine shop itself. Additionally, there were 2 buildings that were left at the end of the steel mill era when it closed. However, they have been destroyed since then. So in 1793, Joseph Shantz established the town of Cambria in Pennsylvania. Soon after, they would rename the town after him, but due to mispronunciation, they would call it Johnstown instead of Joseph Shantz. And then looking at the map, just to the north is where our site is, the North Canoe site. So in 1826, then the Pennsylvania Maritime Canal and Rail System connects Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. And the last leg of this would be the canal system that ran and started in Johnstown and led to Pittsburgh, which would provide Johnstown with a main means of import and export. So in 1852, soon after the canal system, the Cambria Iron Works was established. This would later grow to become the largest steel manufacturing plant in Johnstown. So unfortunately in 1889, due to the collapse of the South Fork Dam, Johnstown flooded and killed over 2,000 people in one day. Again, the city would flood in 1936. This time, it would result in the construction of 11 miles worth of a channelized river system. So that brings us to 1950, at the height of the boys of Johnstown. And at that time, the population was just over 60,000 people, with 18,000 people being employed by Bethlehem Steel, which was formerly known as Cambria Iron Works. So that leads all the way up to 1994 to the end of the steel mill era in Johnstown when the mill closes, which would then lead to today where the population is 1/3 what it was in 1950, and this has had a tremendous amount of economic repercussions to the city. So focusing on and moving to the site of Lower Cambria, It is a site that is located at the confluence of two rivers. Just to the northeast or northwest, sorry, is a series of low-rise commercial buildings, churches, and some residential buildings, as well as just to the south is the center of the city. So accessing the site is by vehicle is primarily through Iron Street, which is a narrow street, and you can see in the image that it's very narrow and very small to get onto the site and traverse through there. Additionally, just across the river is Route 56, which is a main route into Johnstown. Pedestrian access is primarily then through a bridge that was constructed in the late 1800s, or 1900s. 1800s. And this was to allow the workers to walk and get to the site from the adjacent housing places. So then that leads us to other forms of transit. And that's primarily through the Amtrak station that's to the south, just across the rail viaduct, as well as a number of bus stops that would stop at the pedestrian bridge. So green space surrounding the site, there are three main forms of that, and one is a green space, or the urban greenway, which snakes along the river's edge, along the site, and then down into Natural Gas Park, with then across the river from there at Point Park. So looking at the machine shop, and the machine shop primarily has been left vacant since the end of the steel mill era, and provides a large space at the center with a cathedral-like plan, with this bay at the center and then two side bays that allow for additional floors to the ground floor. So moving to the site and the solutions for the site, there are four main objectives. The first would be constructing a connection to the site, because it's very difficult to get there and it's very islanded. So this is done through a bridge that is constructed connecting to Route 56, as well as rerouting Iron Street so that it can be wider and easier to navigate. Then additionally from there, constructing a navigational system of streets on the site to provide more access to the buildings. So then another objective was resurfacing some of the lost relics that were on site. And this, I look back at the way that the site was navigated through rail, and they primarily used these cars on rails to move all the products, the heavy steel, in and out of the buildings over there. So using this to then create another network of pathways through paths, as well as pedestrian paths, as well as plantings and some planter beds that are there. So then the site, of course, being industrial, has little to no green space on it. So providing some green space for the site in the form of a pervious pavement area, where it can serve as a place for farmers markets, as well as any overflow parking that would be used for any events inside the space. And then to the north, providing a sculptural garden space for any of the things that might be made inside, or any artistic things. So then moving and transitioning to the building and solutions there. There are three main constituents for the program in the building, and that's basically using an educational system, then using the redevelopment authority in Johnstown, as well as bringing together the corporations such as maybe the Johnstown Welding and Fabrication plant that's on site to use this space. So then, looking at the building and how do we adapt this and how do we add spaces to it, or implement or insert this program into it. And so I came up with a series of different ways we can do that. And this led to two different forms, or two different schemes. And they're mainly called these because of the response to how the foundry building, or the foundry building that was formerly there, was adjacent to it, and if it became a void or a form, or did we recreate it as it was. And so I created a couple models for them to look at. This led to the void form producing a better opportunity for connection between the green space to the north and the industrial side of things to the south. So then moving to the building objectives and what I wanted to achieve in the building. And that was, it starts through this connectivity and creating this long access that runs from the north to the south, allowing anybody that needed to access or wanted to walk through it to get there, as well as providing a means of travel to the spaces they need to get to. Then additionally, providing another access on the periphery of the north side of the machine shop from east to west. So just to look at the community that's going to be in there and who's there, looking at visitors, anybody that's coming to a large event space that's going to be in there, as well as students and some employees or business employees, startup companies, stuff like that. And so mainly you would start by coming in the north for most people, and you'd be greeted by the Iron Gallery or the cafe that's there. Then you could move across to the opposite side of the foundry court. That there's a shared workspace for any startup companies that would like to take place in this building. And then at the center and at the heart of this complex is the steel hall that provides a vast, large open space to hold any kind of conventions or to serve as a breakout space for the maker spaces that are on the periphery of that large space. So then moving to between the ground floor and the second floor, the existing second floor there, a floor was added to the north side to provide some educational spaces that allow for connectivity. And so it's a catwalk-like space, which I'll show you a little bit later, that you can see the connection between what's going on inside the classrooms and down into the open workspace where people are assembling any kind of projects that they have. And then this would move up to the second and third floor, which are outfitted with a flexible office space, which we'll talk about next. So to start that off, I want to look at the way that this thing was constructed. And it was primarily constructed with riveted steel columns and beams with a brick facade on it, and concrete roof and a concrete floor. And these basically have no insulation value to them. So providing a space in which we can condition and add an envelope inside these buildings for the office spaces that are there. And so this is constructed through 6-inch structural insulated panels, then moving to a suspended ceiling from the existing structure that also has insulation on it. Then providing a raised access floor that gives any kind of services or access to any services and allows for flexibility throughout these spaces. And then additionally in there, some insulation completing the envelope. Within these office spaces, I was looking and trying to provide some flexibility within them. So developing a wall system that can be moved and easily adapted as the building grows and contracts. And so these wall systems are primarily made out of some baffling and some steel structure there, but are left on casters and have a locking system on the top where it will lock into a C-channel in the ceiling. So then moving to the last building solution, primarily this is trying to contrast what's going on from the old and the new. And to do this, again, looking at the weathered and worn structure of the brick, as well as the riveted steel. I contrast that with the warm feeling of the wood, and the wood texture, as well as some concrete on the base floor, creating a base there, as well as adding some additional glazing and contradicting the steel structure that was existing there, which was riveted in I-beams with a tubular system or hollow steel system. So going back to those users and how are they going through the space and how are they using the space? So we'll start off with the visitor who's going to enter through the north entrance. Then they're going to be greeted by the still gallery where they can enter and see how this space used to be or used to function. And they can see all the activities that used to be there through images or any other artifacts that are left from there's an abundance of museums that are within Johnstown, so they would be easily used and traded for. And so after they're there, they can then move into the large gallery or still hall, which would provide a space for any kind of conventions that they're most likely attending. So then the student, and how are they navigating this space? They would most likely be dropped off at the Foundry Court. Then they would enter into this space that serves as a kind of an open workspace or a space where they can go get their coffee, sit there and work and study a little bit, as well as any of the other people that are, the business people, individuals in the space can use this also. Then they would move up to their catwalk system that I was talking about before, where they're raised above a workspace that's down below, and with a high bay and low bay system between these classrooms, they can see into the classroom through some of the glazing that's there, and then down into the space below and the projects that are going on. So after they're in these classrooms and they've already kind of had some instructional time, they can then move to the workshops that are there, which there are two types of workshops that are provided in here. There's a steel workshop as well as a wood workshop. And additionally, there would also be some 3D printing spaces that are in the building. After they've constructed these, or cut out these pieces or made these pieces, they can then go over to the open workspace where they can assemble whatever their projects, or they can go over there and work together with any group members that they have, using some of the hung marker board systems that are there that are movable, as well as any of the breakout spaces items. So the last individual that we'll talk about is the corporate employee, and they would most likely enter through the south of the building. They would then move into their office space, their flexible office space for a while, and then maybe that day they have an instructional learning event that's going on, and they can use the space that's inside Steel Hall as a presentation space there. So wrapping up with all that and looking at how we can expand into the other buildings that are adjacent to there. And most of these buildings on the site are similar to, or in similar construction to what this building is. Although they may be a little bit smaller, you can utilize the modular, flexible modular office system that provides an envelope in these buildings, as well as these buildings also lend themselves to the makerspace kind of program. And so wrapping that up, this thesis has provided a means in which we can revitalize these post-industrial remnant buildings through the implementation of an educational makerspace and some business incubator programming. Thank you. Some questions?
In general, it's a very nice project.
Thank you.
I do have some questions about that main space in the middle. It's how tall, 60 feet?
It's like something like 72, 70, something like that to the highest peak.
How tall is this space?
Good question, I never measured. But it's shorter than what I have. I can tell you that.
You talked about that space being for breakout as one of its major reasons. But on the upper floors, you put the circulation on the outside face and not the inside face.
Right, so I'm implying that...
And as we've noticed here, that hallway is a major breakout space. It's where people leave the classrooms, look back down into here. It engages the upper floors and for better or for worse, in the breakout space. I'm just wondering why you put the circulation on the outside.
So putting the circulation on the outside, I think, was a way that the exterior walls weren't conditioned as well, and so to leave the aesthetic of what the existing structure is there, so that you can walk past these walls and see outside, additionally into what would be the court that's out here. So you get a view outside instead of, and additionally not touching basically what the existing structure is there. So moving it to the other side allowed me to not impede upon the existing structure as much as what would be needed if I moved it to the opposite side. So these walkways on the outside aren't as conditioned and aren't really conditioned as well as the ones on the inside. However, there are, to provide views, there's these, what used to be loading bays. So there's the overhead would come over and drop them on there. And so there's a conference room or an office that could be there. As well as it all provides a number of along it glazing that allows you to see into it like in the office.
I think that's a fair answer. But nonetheless, when I look at, the sectional perspective, and I see people only on the ground floor, tiny people in a 70-foot tall space. When I look at the perspective on the top, again, people down below, the wall's not activated. I think about the importance of circulation here. I think about the importance of circulation at the National Building Museum. How all of that really becomes a part of keeping that central space from feeling dead at times. It's, I think, a tough point to start with when you have such a big space in the middle of the building and you have to figure out what to do with it. And, simply to turn it over to breakout and things like that, I just think you've got to find other ways to activate it. I think rethink those elevations above. I think there have to be other ways to solve the issue of dealing with the outside wall and really activate the inside edge, which is something we've looked at anyway.
Thanks.
I think it's exciting to see a project within an existing building. It's a challenge in and of itself. Can you talk a little bit? You started to touch on how you made these sort of cubes that were inserted within. Can you talk about where you chose to reveal the existing structure and where you chose to maybe conceal it? I'm particularly interested in these pop-ups in the roof and where those might relate to the program inside.
So when you're in the large still hall, there is a glazing system that's up there, so it does provide a little bit of conditioning there, so that it's not venting any heat that's being put there. And you can see out, so it is vision well, so you can see right through it. However, the other spaces that you'll see this is on the third floor when you're walking through the hallways. To provide that envelope, I primarily just boxed it off with the ceiling plane that is on that third floor.
Going back to the idea of how tall the space is and, comparing it to that. Again, I was a student here a long time ago. And when we started, we were in a temporary building across campus, and then we moved in here. And it had that sort of new building mentality, and you couldn't touch anything. We weren't allowed to bring anything into the center spaces. I was told to just keep it wide open. None of this stuff occurred. Nothing. Oh, there was some badminton at one point. That was late night, no cameras allowed.
And there was a can of purple.
Well, there was, yeah. But one night or one weekend, I don't remember which, we came out and painted a map of Manhattan on the floor, which was our way of saying, we got to do something out here. Because it was an architectural void in the center of this building. There were proposals about should we move the library into the center of this building. What can we do to activate this thing? And finally they allowed here and tables to arrive, but for a while it wasn't just an architectural void, it was architecturally void. And that's a dangerous spot to find yourself in when you have such a big space in the center of the building that really doesn't have anything going on inside of that. So I just think you probably need to think that through a little bit more.
Could I speak about that for just a second? One of the great experiences of my architectural studies was going to a Bethlehem steel plant. And a few of my memories are...
Steel stacks in Bethlehem?
Yeah, and it was operating. That was back in the old days. hallways. So, I mean, there are several things that are really seared into my memory. One was the kind of multi-sensory experience of the place, feeling the heat, hearing the sound, and that kind of kinetic energy, steel moving through the building. Another thing was about the enormity of the scale. And so, just a few things. As I look at that space and listen to the discussion about scale, I heard you talking earlier about one of the spaces that would be kind of a museum of steelmaking. And I'm just wondering if you couldn't bring some of the artifacts out into the large space, in a sense to tell the story of why the space is 60-some feet tall. Because right now we lack scale reference. We don't have any modern understanding of why it was so big. But if there were some gantries left there, if there were some steel beams in the space, some of the mats, some of the kind of artifacts that established the rationale for that space. So I just wonder, would that be helpful? Because as I look at, this very beautiful, the very beautiful spaces that you've created, I'm just sort of missing the kind of the dirt, the sort of flame and what seemed like darkness, and some of the more of the industrial past. And I appreciate the way you've held back from the exterior walls so we can see some of what was originally there. And I just wonder, as you're sort of giving a new life to the building, if you need to leave a few more ghosts.
So what is it about steel and the use of steel? And what can you express in this building that talks about structure using an existing frame and adding to it, or you put boxes inside it? So it's an armature of material that you can hang things on. It seems to me you've got a big space in there. I look at these plans with all these stairs. You have an opportunity, and I guess we're on a catwalk theme from the last one, but you can hang your circulation inside that space, couldn't you? And you could come across the back of that space, reduce the number of stairs you need. But philosophically, use steel as the frame by which you added other materials. You showed wood, plastics, whatever that might be, but it shows a dependence on the historic elements there. And then you have a poetic dialogue. And I think you started that, and I think you can go further in that regard. So that would be a suggestion. Your new architecture tends to be sort of Miesian, right? It uses steel. And maybe you want to use that steel in a different way than what it was used historically in the building. And you have that contrast, that dialogue. Do you know Maison de Verre? Pierre Charot. It's one of the incredible buildings. Does core better than core. They use.
What's that? What is it? Hey. Fighting words. You look like step outside that.
But take steel that's rather raw, and then poetically use leather and wood and other things on it to humanize it. That's what a maker space could do. And I think you have this nice dialogue with materials, and then it starts to sing. Very, very nice project.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Sorry.
Sorry. Very, your presentation and also sort of how you articulated went through the whole thing has sort of a lyricism to it that's quite nice. And I'm actually going to start at sort of macro scale. I wish I saw almost like a contextual plan as to what the plan is for those adjacent buildings. Number one, how far am I to the nearest development? Is the nearest development in a residential neighborhood, or is it sort of like an office park, which is going to lead me to sort of ask you questions about the surrounding buildings. So what are their intention for those adjacent buildings? Because you've created a courtyard around them and like stuff like that.
Okay, so these backdrop buildings that are here are vacant.
That they
And
can,
so those can be, that can be kind of the next step. And so we can use what, what we've used in these boxes and in the spaces we provided inside the machine shop. And that can expand into these spaces. Additionally, there are 3 buildings there. One is the blacksmith shop, which is kind of tucked in back here. And that is actually, that's historically registered, and they're trying to revitalize it back to working blacksmith shop. And that's being used by the Center for Metal Arts. And they're using all 3 of those buildings right now. So right now, they're using all 3, but they're trying to get the blacksmith shop running so that the other ones will then become vacant as they start to transition over that building. So that's an additional way in which, the pattern shop is here, and the rolling mill office that was there, that we can expand into those.
So I think it's a very important point that was brought up about the ground-based level in terms of occupying it and not leaving it open. I think there are many buildings in, for example, in Washington, D.C. that are struggling with that very same fact. As a matter of fact, I'm working on a project right now, the IMF building downtown, which has this great space, that surrounded by like 10-story offices that look down into this big atrium, but nobody ever wants to use that atrium because it's not programmed. They try to put furniture there for people to work, this sort of cutesy little furniture. Nobody wants to work there because everybody feels like their bosses are looking at them. And you'll notice the same thing here. We tend to work on the edges of the spaces, right? When we put tables out, we'll rather draw there than, we might spill out here on occasion. But we tend to be on the periphery because people want to feel some kind of protection over the head. And I wonder, for example, I'm seeing that gantry that's in the middle of the space there, and I'm like, is that an opportunity to actually help you temper the scale of that space? I can imagine, as the gentleman was talking about, using steel to sort of bring in new instructional program, you can almost hang like a conference room from the ceiling from that piece. That's going to create a secondary ceiling plane that wouldn't make that space feel so tall, so people can actually feel comfortable in that space. Sorry. I thought I was hearing voices. But opportunities like that gantry, you can almost use it to help scale the space so that people feel comfortable within it. I actually...
Somebody must be on our same channel. So. Off for a moment, that was funny.
Ominous music.
Sorry. Dan, something about the report coming back.
So the other thing I was also going to say is, there's a Gensler project that kind of looks like this, where it's a single occupant user, where they readapted a building like this. And they actually created these user spaces that, again, as we're looking at the nature of the workplace, which is transforming now, it's no longer cubicles that people used to have. They have open spaces, flexible dynamic seating, so people can sort of perch at a laptop as opposed to being in a cubicle. And in that scenario, we used the ground floor of that factory as this sort of worker maker spaces that has different texture and heights and character to them, and people in the mezzanine level could sort of see and participate. So in a sense, you can see and be seen while you're in that space. And it leads me to ask the other question, because you mentioned those 3 users. One was a student, there was who were the other 2?
So I displayed a visitor,
And
just
the third.
and that was like a corporate person.
So that's the office user that would be over there. So you can imagine, if they're bold enough and they're big enough that they go, we want to take that entire first floor and make these dynamic spaces within that and occupy that space. So you have people looking at them, which goes to, even though I agree with the gentleman that said that the hallways should be on the inside of the atrium space. In that case, then it would justify you putting the hallway circulation on the outside. So people within the office can see, but they're not disturbing that other user that's down there. And, you're sort of doing your thing on the perimeter, experiencing the history of the architecture without necessarily, it's almost like a diagrammatic section that you have to draw. The user on the ground floor is commanding that section all the way to the roof. And the people on those mezzanine levels are participating, but they're not touching that space. And in a sense, it would make activity, otherwise the space is going to be a challenge. But I think overall, it's a very interesting project.
I think, just to add to that, that was part of the intent for that space was something like that, where projects can be brought out into that. And that's why I left the gantries there.
Okay.
And so as it is operational. So leaving that there and so that you can utilize that for any large projects.
Floating conference room. This would be great. Is it only one bigger space?
So in that space specifically, there's only one, but there are additionally one on each floor on the other side.
Yeah, I just have a question about skylights. You know, again, this industrial building, and it looks like you've just, you might as well not be there. Is that true from what I see? With your shells that you put in there?
Yes.
Why?
I think it was just something that is the next level.
Just missed it.
It's missing.
And that assembly room. Oh, that's
Yeah.
next, okay. The assembly room at the end, is that a two-story space? The assembly room? No, this one, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's awfully tall.
Well, I mean, it's
No,
about,
no, it's 2 stories tall.
the ceiling inside that space is about 25 feet. So, I mean, it's about, but comparatively to what's going on here, I mean, one story is 23 feet.
And
So
yeah.
this is 23
So why isn't that another room, they're just stacked?
on top of it.
Yeah. I mean, it just looks like it's a perfect opportunity to do that. So I guess I'm looking at it, just wondering about, the architectonic qualities that were inherent in the existing building. In some cases, I think you kind of missed it a little bit, to take advantage of it. To be able to have, natural daylight, that helps obviously with not using artificial, which also saves, there's a value to that as far as sustainability is concerned. So, just try to pay attention to what the existing building is saying to you, and then go from there. So it just looks like you turned your back on it. I would prefer having the circulations to the interior, because if I look at your pictures, it's not such a bad landscape.
Picturesque.
Yeah, to look at, even with the industrial buildings in the foreground. And, if you're in an office or in a classroom, the daydream a bit, that seems like a great opportunity to do it. So just question that.
So the comment that you made about having been to the steel plant, we also went there when I was a student here. You're kind of bringing back memories as you talk about this. And it's funny, my major memory of being there was how many people working there had less than 10 fingers. I mean, it was a brutal place. It was not, it was, yeah, it's nice, and it's been cleaned up. And I'm wondering if, it's one of these things that you deal with history when you want to clean things and sanitize things, but where do you cross the line where it's become something very, very different? And I think it's too sanitized. I'm not sure the floor looks like a very, very light terrazzo. I'm not sure that's the appropriate floor.
The existing,
What you have
so
in,
inside the space, it would be left with the existing.
that's the existing floor?
Yeah, it's meant to be left. It's meant to be left, so like if you're out here, it's a polished floor, but when you get into here, it's still the rough floor,
Well, what is it? What's that material?
concrete. It's just
Oh, it is
rough,
concrete?
yeah,
Okay,
rough and
well, the
beyond.
renderings don't show that. Did the walls look like this inside the space? No.
So
I mean, they wouldn't have the yellow
they're all
color.
concrete, or they're all brick. So anything else that's not brick wall is a new intervention. So,
Well, my point is that I'm just wondering, all I can think of, this is going to sound, because again, it's a nice project, it kind of has that food court, overly clean, overly large, overly feeling to it, and maybe it's too bright, maybe the lighting shouldn't be quite so, it just like something a little bit grimier, something that talks about how brutal this place was, but the steel stuff actually was being made.
It could just be a function of adding a little more grit to the rendering.
yeah, I think that's, there's a lot of grit in
Well,
space.
it's interesting because I was recently on a jury for
museum award that's not really an architecture award, but two of the submissions were the Brooklyn Historical Society's Dumbo Space and Mass MoCA's Building Number 6 in North Adams, Mass. And what both of those projects did really well was to leave artifacts of the people who used those buildings when they were industrial buildings. So, you know, sketches that somebody did on the brick wall, or, you know, little pieces of this or that, or the 10th finger on the floor, or whatever, you know, is left there to get a sense of what it was. Yeah. But not to sound like a broken record, but what your project is missing, and otherwise you've done a lot of good things very well, is detail and materiality of your interventions. And I keep getting drawn to the center drawing there, and the mustard color wall, or whatever it is, that I assume is something you added, right? Between the steel grid, which I assume is original, the vertical grid, the whatever. You know, I think it'd be interesting to divorce your mustard yellow walls from the steel and let the steel say this was an open steel thing, and then make that wall out of cable netting truss, glass panels, spider fittings, something really of today and high tech, to contrast it with your, you know, century older original stuff. Leave the chips of paint on the brick walls and on the interior and stuff like that, and really play off today versus history, and just think about some of the details. It would have made for a much stronger, more interesting project, and would have given you a reason to not put the balconies on the interior part.
Well, all fun times have to come to an end. Sorry that you were interrupted, Mide, but we broadcast on a frequency of 121.0 megahertz, which is really close to 121.5 megahertz, which is the international radio distress frequency for aircraft. And since we're so close to launch, these things. Am I correct? 121.5? Yeah. I can't remember, Brian. Brian's thesis, I think, it brings up a lot of interesting questions, and I hope that some of you out there that are about to do thesis, if you're doing a thesis that involves adaptive reuse, my poster boy here, Ryan, will tell you, find documentation about your building now, build a robust model now, do that, and you'll be able to address a lot of the issues that came up here today. We were about halfway through the semester before we really had a robust model of the building where we could actually visualize what was there and really understand what was going on. And so that really kind of impeded the progress on a lot of the issues, and certainly it didn't allow us to get to the much more tactile issues of, you know, interrogating how we're doing infill throughout the building. You know, I will concede in terms of surface, Pierre Chareau presents a much more exciting surface, but in terms of space, I must say, there is the master. This has been a triumph, though, Ryan, for you. You know, you've pulled this off despite, I mean, there was a period of time where Carl and I we'd go behind a closed door after meetings and say, is he going to do it? Could he possibly do it? Is there any way he can do it? And you've done it. You've pulled it all together. And sure, there are a lot of issues that could have been pushed further if a lot of the documentation had been done earlier. But there was also an aspect to your process that I think also made it a little difficult. And I just point this out not only for you, but for others, is that I don't ever want to play poker with you, because you keep your cards really close to your chest. And you'll like put one down for me to look at, and then you pick it up real fast, and put another one down for me to look at, and then you pick it up real fast. And you rarely lay them all out like you did with that one drawing which showed all the schemes, which was before we knew what the building was about as critics. So figure a way to share more of that earlier on. Know that we're not here to threaten you, that the people you work with, you want to be able to share your thought process with. Brian didn't want to get up here in front of you today. And Brian has, I will say, made more progress, thanks to you, more progress in terms of putting together a presentation than anybody I've worked with in the past. And I just really want to thank you very much for just keeping a good face. You took it on the chin several times from me. I was pretty rough, but you did a great job, buddy, and I respect you for it.